I think perhaps so. After all, the pro-family activists are, almost by definition, in favor of at least somewhat higher fertility. It is hard to have families without babies. And these days, many neo-feminists are also complaining about the conditions that lower fertility, the lack of paid maternal leave from a job, the high cost of daycare, the difficulty of finding a mate, of beating the biological clock. So, the activists, both Latter-day Feminists and the traditionalists, have some similar goals. The feminists want to make it easier for women who work to have children. The traditionalists want to make it easier for women to be able to stay at home, not to make outside work the center of their lives, and to have children. Politics aside, both sets of views are pro-natalist, but with one crucial difference. Feminist plans, if they were tried and if they worked, could probably yield some additional families of 1 or 2 children among families that otherwise would have had fewer offspring. Traditionalist plans, if they were tried and if they worked, could yield additional families of 3 and 4 children among families that otherwise might have had fewer offspring. Programs for both agendas are valid and might indeed have a good chance to raise the TFR, provided, as we have learned in the Eastern European versus Western European model, that in their totality, such plans are big, comprehensive, bold, and expensive. Now, family policy is already shaping up to be one of the great issues of our time. It would be a shame to let the players at the table be confined to feminists and traditionalists. We pro-natalists ought to get in the game too. Let us now take a cursory look at some of these small ideas that can add up, and some big ones that can knock your socks off. Consider first the neo-feminist agenda. Perhaps at the top of every list of feminist reform is daycare. It can be a crucial, usually expensive service for working women. Women at home with their children don't typically need daycare, although even mildly well-to-do women usually take advantage of it in one way or another. The varieties of daycare plans, solutions, and semi-solutions are almost infinite. Federal funding for better regulation and licensing of, state funding for, better training for providers of, encouragement of help from the business sector, and so on. My own favorite semi-solution to the daycare issue concerns the American corporation. Many of them behave these days as if they had no idea of what is approaching in the 1990s. To all with eyes to see, it is clear that there will be labor shortages for some businesses because the birth dearth babies who will soon be reaching the age of work will be few in number. At the same time, for some industries, for the same reason, fewer birth dearth adults, there will be less demand for their goods or services, causing both dislocation and unemployment. Both these factors, it would seem, would put a premium on corporations seeking out the very best employees. In industries that will be doing well in the 90s, there will be sharp competition among companies for good employees from a smaller pool. For companies that will be hit by turbulence due to changing markets, the need for good employees may be even more critical. It may be hard to stay in business with a mediocre workforce. And one more fact. The rate of women in the labor force is expected to continue to increase. Mr. Businessman. Under such conditions, how will you entice and keep a stable and energetic labor force? Of course, good salaries help, benefits help, good working conditions help, and pro-natalist policies in the private sector would help, making it a little easier for a young couple to have a child, or a second child. Will make it a little harder for a competitor to steal your employee. Many corporations these days offer employees a cafeteria plan for benefits. An employee can choose a number of benefits, adding up to more than a stipulated cost. Typically, the items offered may include healthcare, dental care, optometry, legal services, investment services, and prescription drug benefits. The very few companies offer daycare for toddlers as a benefit. Mr. Businessman, I think you are making a mistake. Not only should the cost of daycare be offered as a choice in your cafeteria package of benefits, but I think if you really wanted to attract the best young workers, you would go one step further and wherever possible set up a daycare center at the site of the jobs. Such a facility, if well run by qualified professionals, could prove to be a great attraction to potential employees. Mothers or fathers could bring their young children to work with them and drop them off at the on-site nursery school. If most places of work had such arrangements, it would surely make parenting for working mothers easier, more fulfilling, and less traumatic for both mother and child. It would offer mother and young children the potential of more time together. When? Traveling to and from the job, during lunches, during coffee breaks, during any emergency or even a mini crisis. Perhaps during a special break during the day. All this could dilute much of the guilt of working mothers who often feel they are not close enough for long enough to their offspring. It would diminish that looming fear of working mothers, of one day hearing her child calling the babysitter mommy. What the fuck? Pretty sure that doesn't usually happen.
That doesn't happen.
That does not usually happen. Making motherhood and a career easier to manage simultaneously could increase fertility, at least somewhat. It could provide a great lure to help a corporation recruit the best young workers at a time when labor markets are tight. It's a good, if limited, idea. Mr. Businessman, you say your firm is too small to handle it? How about pooling with some other firms in the same office building or the same industrial park? But suppose the parents, for whatever reason, don't want to or can't send their toddlers to an on-site daycare center. Perhaps the child stays with grandma while mom works. Perhaps the parents want the toddler to go to a private daycare center, perhaps a religious one. Ideally, the corporate benefit plan would subsidize, to some degree, the cost of the off-site daycare service involved, just as some businesses now subsidize some of the cost of dental care as an offset to the amount of available cafeteria services. That's one small piece of the puzzle. It's non-governmental. It's pro-family and pro-feminist. Unfortunately, fewer than 2,000 firms in America, out of an estimated 3 million, currently run on-site daycare centers. How could we increase the number? Oh my god, I thought he said one of the bitches. One of the hitches in the system apparently is liability insurance. Given the current state of the law and the practice of juries, insurance companies are often chary of issuing coverage for anything involving children. Perhaps the federal government could set damage limits and then serve an insurer of last resort. Can then serve as insurer of last resort. What the fuck? That would make it easier for corporations to participate in on-site daycare. What else is on the feminist table these days? One certainly proposed bill dealing with daycare, the Child Care Opportunities for Families Act of 1985, handles matters as diverse as licensing, training, and retraining of providers, scholarships for providers, child care for handicapped and chronically ill and poor children, pilot programs, crisis nurseries, just to begin the list. Add to that an array of other service programs that have been advocated to help working mothers. These include unpaid maternal leave, paid maternal leave, flex time, job sharing, the reestablishment of the daycare tax credit, new daycare arrangements utilizing the skills of the elderly, again, just to begin a list. All these programs have one thing in common. They make it easier for a woman to work and have children. There is some merit to each of the mentioned items. They ought to be judged on the merits and put into practice by the appropriate agencies. Governments at various levels, businesses, or other mediating structures, such as churches, synagogues, fraternal groups, and at other levels. If it's judged a good plan, let's do it. Money should be no object. Remember, we're saving Western civilization. And besides, as you will see in a while, I may have come up with a plan to create some extra money. One thing, however, must be recalled about all those essentially feminist plans designed to help working women. They tend to meet only 3 or 4 operating principles. They are indeed non-coercive. They do expand rather than reduce options. They do tend to deal with in part with the idea that it may well be that 1.8 or 1.6 is the natural TFR in a developed nation, and consequently some external aid is required to boost the fertility rate. But what is missing from those plans is our fourth criterion, to help some women, those who want to have 3 to 4 children. While daycare, maternal leave, flex time, etc. can probably help push up fertility at the margin, such programs will typically only make it easier for most of the involved women to bear only 1 or 2 children. But the fact is, it is very, very difficult for a woman to continue working in an economically serious way while she is raising 3 or 4 children. To bear and raise 3 or 4 children, a woman typically must be able to stay home, at least when the children are very young. Given the normal spacing of pregnancies, that typically involves a 10-year hiatus from the labor force, if not more. What the? And recall that some additional 3s and 4s are needed to raise a TFR. Without more 3 to 4 children families, the chances of going up to a 2.1 TFR or more are slim. Remember, the 2s are right on target, but no matter what we do, there will always be 1s and nones, which must be balanced out. How to get those bigger necessary families? How to make it easier for women to want to stay home? How to make it easier for women who want to stay at home to stay at home? Oh, okay. How? Give them money. Lots of it. In order to at least partly compensate for lost earnings. Remember, that is an important part of the solution that has worked at least for a decade or so with those dear communist governments in Eastern Europe.
You know, he was saying, like, moments and pages ago that, like, materialist women, and now he's just like, let's pay women!
Yeah.
He's
Let's
going...
be materialist.
These people are always contradictory. He's been doing that throughout the whole book.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
I noticed. How to get money to people? The fastest traditional way to deliver targeted funds to people is through the tax code. If you want to get money to the parents of children, that can be done simply by raising the personal exemption that is automatically computed into every taxpayer's annual bill. In point of fact, in the big new tax bill of 1986, the exemptions for all Americans were substantially raised from $1,080 per person to $2,000 per person. That is an additional exemption of $920 per person in America. The Reagan folks crowed mightily that this was a pro-family tax bill because it delivered more money to parents of children. More children, more exemptions. However, the big bonanza was a tax deduction, not a tax credit. And so, because the bill also provided lower tax rates, ultimately down to only 2 levels, 15% and 28%, the actual cash value of the additional personal $920 exemption ranged from $138 to $257 per person per year. Not exactly enough to raise a child on, or even make much of a dent, for real. A more serious, more pro-family, more pro-child tax plan could have been designed without putting any greater drain on the Treasury. One way to do it would have been to keep the old personal exemption of $1,080 adjusted for inflation for everyone except children under age, say, 16, with no additional expenditure. That would have provided a new personal exemption for a child under 16 of about $3,900 for each child. If converted into a tax credit, which would equalize the monies received for rich and middle class alike, the real cash value would be about $700 per child. Almost enough to tip the balance for some people who are weighing the pros and cons of having an additional child. Under such a plan, poor people who no longer pay federal income taxes under the new tax code could get a similar amount through a direct payment using the equivalent of an earned income tax credit. In this way, extra cash bonuses would be awarded only to children and their parents, but not, as in the new tax law, to everyone. It is straight redistributionist policy, but not in the classic rich to poor manner. It would be redistributionist in the sense that it takes tax dollars from those without young children and gives tax dollars to those with young children. Accordingly, it could help raise fertility among women who don't work and want large families. The more children, the more dollars, but still nowhere near the total cost needed to raise the children, diminishing any fear that it would encourage illegitimate births among poor women just to get money.
What? Oh.
So it would give them more money, but not enough to actually raise the kids. So supposedly that diminishes any fear that would encourage illegitimate birth among poor women just to get money. So he's saying illegitimate births. That sounds like children outside of wedlock. So he wants people to be married too.
Oh, true. He did mention that a lot.
He doesn't want poor women having kids.
Yeah.
While the plan is designed to help mothers of larger families, it would also help working mothers with smaller families. The extra money, for example, could be used for daycare. This is no radical scheme. It would do nothing more than go partway toward adjusting the original 1948 exemption figure to compensate for subsequent inflation. An alternative scheme, much more controversial, could direct the extra monies more sharply to encourage only larger families. Under such a plan, the extra payments would go only to the third and fourth children in a family, but not to children number 1 and 2. Indeed, in just such an attempt to boost large family fertility, there are a number of countries that do offer extra rewards to the parents for each child more than 2. Such a plan could be justified on the grounds that working women with smaller families get their bonuses in the form of some service programs like paid maternal leave, mentioned earlier. It was said at the outset, and repeated too many times, that this book is partly a speculation. So be it. Speculate along with me about whether there may be an even more dramatic way to target the Birth Dearth program. Forget using the income tax code with deductions, exemptions, and credits. Even $700 per child may not do much good, but suppose a substantial U.S. government check were simply given each year, for 16 years, to the parents of each new baby born after a certain date, say January 1st, 1989. To be of some real help, the money involved would probably have to be about $2,000 per year per baby. That still wouldn't be enough to bribe couples to bear children, quite possibly out of wedlock, which would only exacerbate an existing severe problem. But it would help alleviate the cost of parenting, and at the margin, perhaps encourage some potential parents to have an additional child or two. Now, no matter how you cut it, this is a very expensive program, adding up to annual expenditures of hundreds of billions of dollars over time. But remember, we have already decided that nickel and dime programs usually don't work. In an era of budget austerity, hundreds of billions is big money, to say the least. In fact, it's not small potatoes even when times are flush. Where can such large amounts come from? Where should it come from? What? Where can such large amounts come from? Where should it come from? Let us continue to speculate, and perhaps daydream a bit. Such big money can and should come from only one source, the Social Security Trust Fund. The amount flowing through that fund in 1985 amounted to $190 billion. Money's coming in from workers and going out to pensioners. But by the year 2015, as the 80 million baby boom babies are producing at full steam and producing Social Security payments at full steam, and most of them not yet retired, a surplus of about $1 trillion will be in that fund. Now, that accumulation of $1 trillion or so dollars can pay for a lot of baby bonuses from now to 2015. However, at about that year of 2015, as the baby boom babies begin reaching retirement age, something quite dramatic begins to happen. The value of the Social Security fund starts slipping down, way down, as the now retired boomers start drawing monthly checks. Now, let it be noted here that Social Security projections are a morass. They involve future unemployment rates, growth of the economy, longevity, and crucially, fertility rates. Interested political activists can produce almost any scenario for the future, ranging from everything is okay to disaster beckons. But most analysts agree that there are difficult times ahead for the trust fund in the long term. Unless major changes are made or trends change, it will likely go broke. Sometime after the boomers begin... boomers. It's funny hearing this guy say that. Sometime after the boomers begin retiring in the next century. It will happen sooner, perhaps much sooner, if one stipulates that the Medicare Trust Fund, soon to go into debt, is absorbed by the larger Social Security Fund.